Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how I handle footage shot using Cine EI when editing in Final Cut Pro. For my FX3 setup here, I've got my C1 zebras set to 45 IRE, which I can use to monitor middle grey exposure with the Sony A7iv Lut. I'll also set my C2 zebras to 99+, however, we'll just use the C1 zebras set to 45 middle grey for now. If I bring up the exposure using the iris control on the lens and switch on the zebras, I can set the exposure so that the centre of the middle grey swatch is showing the zebra pattern, which is indicating 45 IRE. Note that the camera is currently using Cine EI mode and my EI is set to the lower base indicated by the L at the end, and it's set up at the normal lower base level of 800 EI. In order for Cine EI to do its thing, we need to have the LUT turned on, and I can confirm that's the case by toggling it on and off, as I have custom button 4 set to control that. I'll start by recording the first clip with these settings. The scene I've set up here is evenly lit, however there are some dark areas here. In an example like this, we might want to increase exposure a little to reduce any chance of having noise present in the shadows. To do that, I'll drop the EI by 1 stop, which will result in the clip being exposed 1 stop brighter than we are seeing on the screen. I'll change the EI down 3 clicks to 400 EI. Now I'll bring the exposure up using the iris to put the zebras back on the middle grey swatch. I'll record another clip with this setting, giving us a clip that's exposed 1 stop over. A common choice when shooting in S-Log is to shoot 1.7 stops over, so I'll do that same thing with Cine EI by setting it at 250 EI. To do that, I'll go down 2 more clicks. Again, I'll bring the exposure shown on the screen back up to show zebras on the middle grey, and then I'll record a third clip with that setting. Now, through the examples shown so far, the scene has been lit evenly, and you'll notice the multimeter on the camera is showing ±0 throughout this. But that's not always going to be the case. If you're shooting outdoors, then you might be dealing with a bright sky and need to have more dynamic range in the highlights. To replicate that, I'm going to increase the brightness of the vertical light tube in the background so that it's starting to clip. I'll change the EI back to the base level of 800, and again I'll set exposure using the middle grey. Here you can see that the multimeter is now showing the overall image as being overexposed by 1.3 stops, which goes to show that you can't rely on the multimeter always when using Cine EI. Next, I'm going to change the zebras to the C2 setting, which I've set at 99+ IRE. And as you can see, the light in the background is starting to clip a little. So I'll go ahead now and record another clip at the base low level of 800 EI. So what we can do to give ourselves a little more headroom in the highlights is to increase the EI value, which will bring the exposure down. I'll switch the zebras back to C1 and then increase the EI value by 1 stop, which is 3 clicks up to 1600 EI. Then I'll bring the middle grey back to correct exposure using the iris. This setting will result in the recorded footage being 1 stop underexposed, so I'll go ahead and record that clip now. Note that even though we're recording underexposed here, the multimeter is still displaying 1.7 stops over, so you have to be aware that the meter isn't always going to give you the correct information based on what you're shooting. Finally, I'll set 2500 EI, which will make our clip 1.7 stops under and give us a good chance of capturing more of that highlight detail. Once again, I'll bring the exposure back by setting the zebras on the middle grey. Let's record one last clip with this setting. It's worth bearing in mind that using a higher EI value above the base level and underexposing the shot like this does risk more noise in the shadows. If I switch the LUT off here, you'll see just how low the exposure actually is. When I switch the LUT back on, it's making the shot look much brighter than it actually is due to the high EI setting we've made. Okay, with all the clips recorded, let's jump over into Final Cut Pro and see what they look like. So I'm here in Final Cut Pro and I've brought in, as you can see, the 6 clips here that we recorded on the FX3. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project and we'll just call this Cine EI Adjust That'll be enough. Okay, there we go, there's our new project. And I'm going to take each of these 6 clips and using the E key I'm going to drop them in. I'll adjust these so they're roughly the same size, and then I'm going to expand them out to fill the timeline. Now you'll see as we look at these that the exposure is different with each one, which is as you'd expect, because we were changing the exposure index value as we were going. But the first one, we shot that with the correct exposure without any EI adjustment. So we'll just drop in the custom LUT, and I'm just going to set this to the standard Sony A7iv LUT. So there we go, that's our baseline. So this is, without any other adjustments, without adjusting color or exposure. That's straight from the camera with the A7iv LUT applied to it, which I think looks quite good. And you can see on here we've got a waveform, so we can monitor the values in there as well. So as a baseline here, you can see that our skin tones, which are kind of these here in the middle, we sort of set them here. They're coming in about 65, up to 65. So let's move on to our first exposure, which we shot using EI. And that's this one where we dropped 1 stop, which was 3 clicks. And as you can see here, by the way I've renamed the file, this was shot at 400 EI. The first thing we'll do is we'll do the same thing. So we'll just drop the same LUT on. We'll give that the A7iv LUT. And you can see straight away, it is overexposed, as you would expect, because we planned to do that with the way we shot it. Comparing that to the original one and then that one, we need to bring exposure down. So this is the way I work with Cine EI. Now, we shot this one one stop over. So we set the EI down to 400 EI. So what I'm going to do now is I'm literally just going to add another custom LUT. So you can see here that we've got two custom LUTs. The first one was our Sony A7iv. For this one, I'm going to call up a custom LUT which I've created. I've created a set of them. And I've called that PJ EI Adjust. And you can see here that I've created a whole bunch of these. I don't necessarily use these where they, I record the way they're shot. All I normally do is play with these and find one which makes the footage look how I want it to look. But for this example, I know we were shooting one stop over, so I can literally set this to -1, this one here, and immediately that's gonna do that. But you'll notice that there's still some difference here between the two. Why is that? Well, the reason it's doing that is because we need this adjustment LUT here to be at the top. So I'm going to move this above the other LUT here. So now when we look, you'll see that that's spot on. So just by adding that EI adjustment there, I've brought our next shot in to be pretty much exposed the same. And if you didn't know that this was shot at one stop under, you could just play around with these and you could just say, well, let's try, I can bring this in to the level that I feel I want to work with. But let's leave this on -1 for now. Okay, so following that then we can do the same thing. We can go along to this one, which we know we shot at 1.7 stops over by moving our EI down to 250. But what I'm going to do is, rather than start from the beginning and add custom LUTs again, I'm just going to copy this one. I'm going to do Command C, and on here I'm just going to do Shift Command V, and that's going to drop in the attributes from the previous clip. Now you can see here it's saying it's going to drop both LUTs in, which is fine, so I'm just going to say paste. And then straight away that's done that. But what we need is to drop the EI even further here, so we're going to go down to -1.7. There we go. So now when we look at these three, if you look at the actual color chart here, the color checker, you can see that's pretty good across all three there. It's not really changing. The only thing that is changing is because I've had to change the exposure. I've had to drop the f-stop, so you're seeing we're getting more bokeh in the background as the f-stop was opened up. But as you can see, this makes it really quick to adjust the EI, and then you can go on and do sort of minor changes after that. So what were the advantages here with shooting in Cine EI? Well, as an example, let's zoom in and I'll go to, say, let's go to 400%. And I'm just going to go down to the bottom left of the image here. Let's find an area, say, actually let's go 200, that's probably a bit close. Let's have a look down here. The first one we shot at correct exposure at 800. If you look, if I play this clip back, you'll see there is some visible noise down here in the shadows. It's not terrible, but you know, it's visible. And if you wanted the cleanest possible image, then we can fix that by changing the exposure index. So looking at this one, we've got a little bit less noise. You can see that's, you know, it's a lot cleaner. And likewise, if we go along to this one, which was shot 1.7 stops overexposed with Cine EI at 250, then the noise is barely visible here. And likewise, you can also see this if you look here in the waveform. Notice on the first one, you can see quite a lot of noise just by looking in here. They see this sort of shivering look. You'll see it as that changes to the next clip, that reduces. So as I say, this was shooting one stop over. And likewise on the last one, when we were 1.7 stops over, it's even better. But going back to looking at the whole clip, we've still got the same sort of quality and exposure on the color checker here. So, you know, that's why there is an advantage in shooting over in S-Log sometimes, as long as you've got the headroom to be able to do it. So let's look at our clips that we shot with that light in the background. So this was the baseline one. When we turn the light up, I'm just going to copy the Luts from this first one over onto here, because they were the same. So all we've done here is added in the A7iv Lut. So what we did to try and work with that was we underexposed our image by one stop by setting our exposure index to 1600. So let's do the same thing with this one. I'm going to add in another custom Lut, and then I'm going to set this one to A7iv as well. So we've got that, and then again we'll add another one, and this one I'm going to set to EI adjust, but I'm going to set this down to +1, which is what we shot. Again, we want to move this one up to the top, and then you can see that we're still retaining the correct exposure on the color checker. However, we've got a little bit more highlight detail from that light in the background. Again, you can see that we're losing a little bit of the bokeh in the background because we've stopped down the lens a little. But nonetheless, you can see here that it's doing a good job. We'll do the same thing. Again, I'm just going to copy that clip, and I'm going to paste its attributes into this last one. We'll copy over both Luts. And here, we're going to change this one because we shot 1.7 stops under for this. So I'm going to bring that back up to 1.7. And again, you'll see that as we move through those three clips, the exposure is pretty much staying spot on. Other than, I think we're probably still losing a tiny bit of highlight detail, but it's a lot better that, you know, that we've got more detail in there. Although to be fair, all of these clips work quite well because that is a bright source. One thing you want to bear in mind here is that when you go on to make further color corrections, you need to think about the order of those corrections. As an example, I'll add some color wheels here. I'll bring up the highlights and drop down the shadows a little, and you'll notice that as I do that, I can push the highlights up well above 100, and likewise I can drop the shadows down below 0, so we have a full range of adjustment here. Now if I go over to the movie inspector and place the color wheels at the top of the list instead of at the bottom, then the effects will be different. Notice now that the effect of the color wheels are limited to be between 0 and 100 IRE. I've actually found this to be an advantage at times as it keeps the levels within the Rec. 709 range. However, it is something worth considering depending on your project, and you may want to change the position of these in order to get the required result. If you want to try this method, then you'll need to start by downloading the EI Adjust Luts. I've put a link to download them in the description below, and they're totally free to download. If you like using them and they help with your workflow, then I'd really appreciate it if you like and share this video, as well as subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you really want to pay something to say thanks, then you can use the thanks feature right here in YouTube to do just that. Okay, so once you've downloaded the zip file, the first thing you want to do is double click it. That will unzip it. And then you should just be left with this PJ EI Adjust folder, which contains all the cube files. Next thing you want to do is open a new Finder window and then go to your home folder, the one which has got your name in it. And in there you should see a library folder. Now there's a chance you might not see that. If you don't see it, you can right click on the Finder and then go to Show View Options. And in there you'll see an option to show the library folder. So yeah, just make sure that's ticked and then you'll be able to see it. Once you can see it, go into Library, go into Application Support, and then scroll down and look for Pro Apps. Go into there and you'll see in here you've got Camera Luts and Custom Luts. The one you want here is Custom Luts. So go into there and then simply drag in the PJ EI Adjust folder. And the next time you launch Final Cut Pro, the EI Adjust Luts should be in there ready to use. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, then please leave a comment. I do try to reply to every question and I will gladly help if I can, and I look forward to hearing how you get on with this technique. So thanks loads for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.